Isn't it great that we can come together and sing How Great Is Our God? I want to thank you, church, Brother Dale, for allowing me to come this morning and share with you. I want to take a minute and share a little bit about myself, as well as being able to share a message with you. And it is an honor and a privilege for me and a blessing to be here today with you. I won't take too long. I know that lunchtime is quickly approaching, and that is a sacred time, especially in the Baptist church. And so I'll jump right into it. I always like to begin when I share my testimony right at the beginning, because I was born on a Sunday right before Thanksgiving. And so my family had to miss church that morning. They also had to miss the Thanksgiving meal that the church had that day. So I like to say that Sunday is one of the last times that I missed church, and it's also one of the last meals that I missed. But when I say it's one of the last times I missed church, I've been extremely blessed, and I realize now, maybe more than ever, just how blessed I've been to have grown up in the household that I grew up in. It's sad to say, but it's rare to grow up in the kind of household I did. I had two parents. They were both there. They loved each other. They loved me and my brother, and they loved the Lord. And they raised us to love the Lord. I've got an older brother who's also a youth minister. And so when I was meeting with the committee and talking with them, I said, not to boast in myself, but more my parents. They raised two youth ministers, so they must have done something right. And then Brother Dale pointed out they might have done something wrong too. And very, very possible. But my family has always been very involved in church. My dad's been a deacon longer than I've been alive. My mom plays the piano at our church. They've been on committees and taught Sunday school and just so many different things. And so we were always in church. The old saying, every time the doors were open, we were there. Even when they were closed, my dad had a key so we could get in. But we were always there. We were always involved. Ever since, I could go to church. We've been going to church. And at a young age, my understanding of salvation was I've got to get saved to get to heaven. And if I don't, I'm going to go to hell. And so I don't want to go to hell. I want to go to heaven. And so at 6 years old, I walked the aisle of the church and I looked at the preacher and told him I wanted to be saved. So he pulled me to the side and he prayed with me. And at the end of the church, everybody came through, hugged my neck, shook my hand, told me how proud they were of me. And I thought I was set. I thought that was that. Well, over the next couple of years, I saw many of my friends come to know the Lord, whether it be at Vacation Bible School or church camp or just whatever it might have been. And something just wasn't right. And I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I knew that something wasn't right. And so it was a Saturday night in January in 2007. I was sitting in the living room at my parents' house, and I started talking to my mom and basically telling her I was having doubts about my salvation. And so she walks me through the ABCs of becoming a Christian, all those things that I've heard 100 times. And I say, yeah, I know that, I understand that. And finally she says, well, did you ever actually pray and ask Jesus into your heart? And I realized the one thing that I needed to do, I had not done. And so that night, I prayed, I asked Jesus into my heart. I believe that he saved me, and that is the moment of my salvation. I followed in believer's baptism, and, I wish that at that point I was 9 years old. I wish that over the past 15 years I could tell you I've just been on a straight and narrow path, living for Christ, but it'd be a lie. There were times, especially as I got into teenage years, middle school, high school, dealing with peer pressure, dealing with all kinds of different things being thrown at me. I would stray away at times. And I'd come back. We'd always, go to church camp, and I'd come back on the camp high that we like to talk about, and I'd live for God, but then I'd live for the world. I'd live for myself. It was a constant struggle back and forth. And I believe during this time is when God was originally calling me to ministry. See, we had a Bible club at my high school. I went to Neshoba Central High School. And at the Bible club, I became the president. My junior and senior year, I was a president. And God began to convict me that I had this opportunity to share with 200-300 students at a time. Now, most of them were there to get out of their homeroom, but they were still there. And I had this opportunity, and God was leading me to do something, but each time he would, I would kind of draw back and have this feeling of inadequacy, as if I wasn't good enough to stand before these people and talk about Jesus, because look at all that I've done. Look at all the sins I've committed. During this time, obviously, I wasn't, out of church. I didn't have an option. But, just struggling with sin and allowing it into my life, I had this feeling that I just wasn't good enough. And I felt maybe the call to ministry, I didn't really know, but each time I would push it aside. And so I struggled with this all through high school. The summer after my senior year of high school, my church group went to Infuge, and I went with them. And that week that we were going, I began to really pray and ask God to show me, Lord, what is it you want me to do with my life? Where are you leading me? And, I was already signed up for classes at East Central Community College. I was planning on going into mechanical engineering. And my thought was, if this is not what you want me to do, I don't want to waste my time on these classes. So please tell me. And so I start to pray about it. And during that week, looking back now, I see that God started to open my eyes to so many different areas of my life that I had not surrendered to Him. So many things in my life that I was holding on to, these sins that I had not given up and allowed Him to have control of. And so at the end of the week, I still didn't really know where He was leading me. We got back on a Saturday. That next day on Sunday, we were going to share with the church about our week at camp. And so we were going to do that Sunday night. That Sunday morning, we actually had a preacher preaching a trial sermon. And I can remember him talking about surrendering. I don't remember where he preached from, really what it was about. But I remember him saying surrender. He may have only said it 2 or 3 times, but it just was over and over in my head, surrender. And God made it clear to me that day that what He was calling me to was what He'd been calling me to for a couple of years now was ministry. And so that morning I went and I knelt at the altar and I just prayed and I said, God, whatever you want me to do, whatever kind of ministry, whatever area you want me to speak in or preach in or whatever, God, I want to surrender it all to you. And so I wanted to go and talk with my parents that afternoon. So we got home. I went in their bedroom and I told them I wanted to talk with them about something. And I told them, I said, I've really been thinking and praying about where God is leading me, what He wants me to do with my life. And especially this week at camp. And I said, I think God's calling me to ministry. I said, so this morning I surrendered to ministry because I believe He's calling me to ministry. And now again, I've already got an older brother that's in ministry. And so in my mind, my parents are just going to be over the moon excited, right? Not that they weren't excited, but I tell them, I believe God's calling me to ministry. And my mom looks at me and says, yeah, we know. I said, what do you mean you know? I just found out 20 minutes ago. I haven't told anybody. And she says, parents just know things about their kids, and we always figured you'd end up being a preacher or something. And I said, well, it would have been nice if you'd have shared that with me before I signed up for these classes that I got to get out of now. But I told my church later that night that I'd surrendered to ministry. A few months later, I was able to preach my first sermon. That next semester, I started at East Central Community College. I was there for 2 years. Got really involved in the BSU. My sophomore year, I was the BSU president. And our BSU would go to different churches. The praise band would go and perform, and we would have one of the students would usually share a message. And so especially my sophomore year, but some during my freshman year, I had an opportunity to share. Had preachers call me back and ask me to come and preach for them when they were out. Got an opportunity to serve as an interim youth minister at First Baptist Church in Morton for about 6 months after my freshman year. And God just continued to open up doors and open up opportunities. And so I graduated from East Central. I went to Mississippi State, was there for 2 more years. My first semester at Mississippi State, I was in the BSU, and this guy, I don't really know how to describe him. He was kind of crazy, kind of funny looking. His name's Sam Ivy. I don't know if you've heard of him, but Sam comes up to me in the BSU and says, hey, would you be interested in serving as part-time youth minister at a church in Columbus? And I said, well, sure. And so I go through the interview process, and my second semester, I start as a part-time youth minister at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Columbus. And so I served there for almost 1.5 years. I graduated from Mississippi State. And when I say God opens up doors, I graduated May 1st, 2020, and I started my first full-time job at Forest Baptist Church May 1st, 2020. And as you know, that was right at the height of COVID. And so, God just opened up the door, and He blessed me and gave me the opportunity to serve there. I've been there ever since. And since I've been there, He's continued to open up doors, continued to bless me. We had a family in the church that, as church folks tend to do, they get interested in your life. And this family, especially in my love life. And so one of their daughters was good friends with my now fiance, Mackenzie. And they kind of set us up. he texted me and sent me your number and said, don't mess this up. And so I told him I'd do my best. And so it worked out. We went on our first date January 15th of 2021. We got engaged January 15th of 2022. And so we've been engaged all of about 3 weeks now. So wedding planning is in full swing. But God has just continued to bless me, continued to open up doors. And, each and every area of my life, going back to my salvation, going to the call to ministry, going to the places that I've been, He's given me opportunities and He's given me a choice to make in each area. Thankfully, I've made the right choice some of the time. I've made wrong choices throughout, plenty of times. But thankfully, I've made the right choice in several situations, and He's led me here today. And those choices that I've made is what I want to kind of go into now as I begin this message about the choices that we have and the decisions that we make. So if you have your Bible with you and you want to turn to Daniel chapter 1, that's where we'll be. That's where we'll be starting today, Daniel chapter 1. We're going to be talking about a story that's very familiar to most of you. Daniel is one of the characters in this story, as well as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now you may know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but that is their Hebrew names. So before we get into it, though, I want to give you a little bit of background information. I don't want to give you a whole history lesson, but just a little bit so you know kind of what's going on, what's leading up to this. So if we go back to King David had this dream, this vision, this idea of a temple that was going to be built. But God told him that it wasn't for him to build, but for his son to build. His son Solomon took over as king after David died, and Solomon was to build this temple. And so during the reign of Solomon, the temple was built. Now he got men from all 12 tribes of Israel to come and build this temple. The temple was built in Jerusalem, which was the capital of Judah. Now Judah and Benjamin are the southern two tribes of Israel, and then the northern 10, I'll tell you why I distinguish that way in a minute. All of these men come together and they build this temple in Jerusalem. Now Solomon then passes away, and his son Rehoboam takes over as king. Now when Rehoboam takes over as king, the temple is completed, but the men from the northern 10 tribes had not been allowed to go home yet. They hadn't let them go. And so the northern 10 tribes get together. They send a representative, a guy named Jeroboam. So you got Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Don't get them confused. Jeroboam comes to Rehoboam and says, the temple's been built. It's been finished. Can our people come home? Will you send them home? So this is Rehoboam's first big decision as king, and so he goes to his advisors. Now he's got two sets of advisors. One set was older advisors, guys that had advised Solomon. And of course, we know that Solomon was a very wise man, but he also had some wise advisors. Solomon was actually the only king of Israel that never went to war. He reigned for 70 years and never went to war. And so these guys know a little bit about keeping peace. And so Rehoboam comes to them and he tells them the situation, and they say, yeah, let them go home. No reason for them to be here. They finished their work. So then he goes to his other set of advisors. He's got a younger set. These are just his buddies, basically. And he goes to them and he gives them the same scenario, and they basically kind of puff him up a little bit, and they're like, you need to put your foot down on stuff like this. If you're going to be respected as a king, you need to put your foot down. So he decides to go with their advice, and he goes back and tells Jeroboam that he's not going to send them home. And this is kind of what begins the split of Israel. So the nation of Israel splits into two nations. The northern 10 tribes keep the name Israel. The southern two tribes of Judah and Benjamin take on the name Judah. And I believe it was until 1947 that the nation of Israel remained split. It was not one nation. And so after this happens, obviously Rehoboam is king of Judah. Jeroboam then becomes king of Israel. And Jeroboam was a bad king. He was an evil king. He allowed idolatry, and they worshipped idols in the places that were meant to worship God. And each king after him continued in this path. Israel never had a good king after this point. Judah had a pattern where they would have a bad king, and then a good king, and then a bad king, and then a good king, just back and forth like that. Now, Israel would be taken over by the Assyrians. God would give them into the hands of the Assyrians. And Judah lasted a little bit longer than Israel, but eventually God would give them over into the hands of the Babylonians. And that's where we pick up today in Daniel chapter 1. The Babylonians have come in and taken over Jerusalem and Judah. And so we're going to begin reading in Daniel chapter 1 and starting in verse 1. And it says this: In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hands and some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature of the language and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Now we're going to stop right here for just a moment and kind of recap what we've talked about. So King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians have come in and they've taken over Jerusalem, they've taken over Judah. So the people of Judah are now captives of this land. And it says that Nebuchadnezzar had this idea to bring all of these young men into the king's palace and to teach them the language of the Chaldeans, the literature of the Chaldeans. And I think maybe he did this for a couple reasons. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, we know that he was not a good king, but he was a pretty smart guy. I think part of the reason he might have done this is all of these young men. You think about what he's looking for. He's looking for basically the best and the brightest, the most physically well-built and the smartest, the most charismatic, the best-looking young men, guys like myself. That's who he's looking for. I don't know why that was funny, but anyway, so he's looking for these young men to bring in. These guys would have what we would consider to be leadership qualities. And so I think part of the reason is maybe you take the people's leaders away from them. They're not going to revolt against you or rebel against you. They don't have any leadership. And another part of it was, he's looking at these people that they've just taken captive and has a thought of, why waste their best and brightest? Obviously we can enslave them, we can put them to do manual labor, but some of these guys might have something to offer, so let's see what they've got. And so they bring these young guys in. Obviously, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were 4 of them. And it says that he gave portion of the food that he ate and the wine that he drank to these young men in the time they were going to be here. They're going to be here 3 years, and they would stand before the king. But notice what happens in verse 8. I'll read it again. It says, But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Now, it goes on in the verses to explain to us that it was not just Daniel, but all 4 of these guys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They decided they wouldn't defile themselves, so they go to Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch. They ask him, can we just drink water and eat vegetables? That's what we want to do, because we don't want to defile ourselves. Because the food that this king would have would be considered unclean by the Levitical law, and the wine that he drank. So they didn't want to defile themselves by being unclean because they were going to partake in this food and this drink. And so they ask if they can just drink water and eat vegetables. Ashpenaz tells them, I'll give you a couple weeks, we'll see how you are. And a couple weeks come back, and they're just head and shoulders above everybody as far as physical appearance, as far as how far along they are intellectually. And so he says, you can continue to do this. Now, this seems like a minor detail in the story. That these guys just decided that I don't want to be eating unclean food, so I'm just going to drink water and eat vegetables. What's the big deal over the things that they eat anyway? But to me, I think that because this is such a minor detail in the story, it's very important. And what I mean by that is these guys coming into this, they've just been taken over by these people. They're captives in this land. I'm sure the rest of the guys, because it doesn't mention here that anybody else did this, I'm sure the rest of the guys thought the least of my worries is what I'm eating and drinking right now. I'm just trying to survive. But these guys, from the onset, decided that no matter what, no matter how big, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant it may be, the decision that they were going to be faced with, they were going to make the decision to follow God and to honor him. That they were not going to do anything to defile themselves. They were not going to do anything that was not pleasing to God. And so even when it came to something as small as what they ate and what they drank, they wanted to do it in a way that was going to be pleasing to God. And it seems like an insignificant detail, but it sets up what's to come. Because as you continue reading in the book of Daniel, you get into chapter 2, and Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and we won't get into all the details of the dream. It's a whole other sermon for another day. I'll let Brother Dale preach it. But Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he realizes that it's significant, but he doesn't know what it means. And so he sends word out to all of the sorcerers and the magicians and all these people who claim to be able to interpret dreams. And he tells them that he's had a dream. He needs to know its interpretation, but he gives some stipulation to this. He says, not only must you tell me the interpretation, you got to be able to tell me what my dream was. Because, again, he's a pretty smart guy. He knew that most of these people are probably fake. Most of these people are probably not able to interpret dreams, that I could tell every one of them my dream and every one of them could give me a different interpretation. So to make sure that it's real, that it's true, that this is not just something made up, I want them to be able to tell me my dream and its interpretation. And then he adds on to that if they're not able to do this, then he will have them and their families killed and their houses destroyed. And so the stakes are very high here in what he has told them. And so Daniel hears about this. He goes back to Ashpenaz and he says, tell the king not to go through this. Tell him not to kill all these people. Tell him that I will tell him his dream and the interpretation. So Daniel goes back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They begin to pray for God to reveal this to Daniel. Ashpenaz goes to the king. He tells them that Daniel will come and tell him what his dream means. The next day, Daniel stands before the king. He tells the king his dream and its interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar is just kind of floored by this guy, by his ability to interpret the dream, to tell him what it is. And so he then offers him this promotion kind of deal where he's now, going to be ruling over part of the kingdom of Babylon. And it always reminds me of the story in Genesis of Joseph, right? When he's in prison and he goes and tells the king his interpretation of his dream, and he becomes second in command of all of Egypt. It's kind of the same deal. He's given him this high-ranking position in the kingdom. And Daniel says, well, don't forget about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They helped me out too. So what ends up happening is all four of these guys end up in these high-ranking positions in the kingdom of Babylon. And the people of Babylon were not real crazy about this. And understandably so. I mean, you think if the United States was to take over another country, and then within a few months, some of the people from that country are now senators and House of Representative members or governors. They're kind of leading and making decisions over us. We wouldn't be real excited about it, and the people were not excited about it there. And so they were looking for some way to get rid of these guys. And their opportunity came because if you keep reading, you'll find that King Nebuchadnezzar had this statue built. It was 90 foot high, 9 foot wide, made of gold. And the Bible doesn't specify what the statue resembled or what it was made of, but knowing Nebuchadnezzar and the arrogance that he displayed, it's believed that it's probably a statue of himself. He then sends out a decree over the land that whenever, and he lists a number of instruments. He says, whenever these instruments play, I want you to face the direction of the statue and bow down and worship it. And if you don't, you're going to be thrown in a fiery furnace. So that's the decree. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar, at this time, most powerful king in the world, his word is law. So this is the law of the land now. You've got to bow down to the statue or you're going to be thrown in a fiery furnace. So the first time that all the music plays, everybody stops what they're doing. They bow down to the statue. But somebody notices Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not bowing down to the statue. And so they go tattletale. They go and tell the king. They say, remind him what his decree was. You said if somebody didn't bow down to the statue, they'd be thrown in a fiery furnace, right? And he said, yeah, that's right. He said, well, we saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were not bowing down to the statue. So the king is upset. He's angry. He brings these guys in. And even in his anger, he does something a little bit different because he likes these guys. They've done good. He respects them. And so he gives them a second chance. And this is kind of out of character for Nebuchadnezzar because usually somebody did something that upset him, they just got thrown in a fiery furnace. There wasn't any second thought about it. But he gives them a second chance. And he tells them, the next time the music plays, bow down to the statue. That's all you got to do, right? And if you look over in chapter 3 I want to show you their response. This is probably my favorite part of the story. He tells them that, when all the music plays, they are to bow down to the statue and worship it. And I don't think we have this on the screen, but the end of verse 15, I want to read it for you real quick. He tells them, he says, "But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" So we pick up in verse 16. "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, 'O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up.'" So I want you to notice, if you look in your Bible between verse 15 and 16, do you see a parenthetical that says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego kind of huddled up in the corner and started to decide what they wanted to do? They looked at each other, and you know how sometimes you kind of look at somebody and talk with your eyes. They looked at each other and they did that. They said, "King, give us a day or so to think about this. We'll get back with you." You don't see that. You don't see it because the answer is immediate. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar hardly gets it out of his mouth, and they answer him, and their answer is great, right? Because in verse 16, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." They said, "We don't even need to answer you about this." Nebuchadnezzar obviously is pretty hurt by the fact they didn't bow down to the statue. He's pretty offended, and their answer to him is one of, "You just offended me that you would even ask me to do this." They didn't even have to think about it. They said, "We don't even have to think about this." And then in verse 17, they said, "Our God is able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't," verse 18, he says, "but even if not, we will not serve your gods or worship the image that you've set up." It reminds me, and of course this is kind of drawn from this story, but there's a song by Mercy Me called "Even If." And part of the song, the whole point of the song, he says, "Even if you don't." He says, "I know you're able. I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone." And these guys say the same thing here. Our God is able to save us from the fire. We know that he can do anything. There's nothing outside of the realm of what he can do and the power that he has. And they said, but even if he doesn't, even if we're not saved, we're still going to worship him above yours. There's no way that you can scare me. It reminds me of Paul writing, "For me to live is Christ, to die is gain." What do you do to a guy like that to persecute him? If he says, "If you kill me, I've gained everything. I've gained eternity in heaven." These men were the same mindset. Our God can, but even if he doesn't, he's still more powerful than you. He's still mightier than your images that you set up. So there's nothing you can do to me. The boldness that these men had to stand before this king, to look at him in his face and tell him, "We don't even need to answer you in this. It's not a discussion." And of course, you know how the story goes from there. Nebuchadnezzar in his rage says, "Crank the furnace up 7 times hotter than it's ever been." It was so hot that the men that took them to throw them into the fire died from the heat outside of it. And they throw them in the fire, and King Nebuchadnezzar is looking around, and he realizes that there's not just 3 men in the fire, and they're just kind of walking around. He says to somebody, he says, "Did we not throw 3 men in here?" And they said, "Yeah, we threw 3 in there." And he says, "Well, there's a 4th, and he looks like the son of a god." And so they're just in the fire walking around with Jesus. And they come out of the fire. They're not burned. They don't smell like smoke. Not a hair is singed on their head. Nothing has happened to them. And Nebuchadnezzar falls on his face and worships the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I don't want to underplay that part of it because it is such an important part to see Nebuchadnezzar fall on his face, a guy that was so arrogant and thought so highly of himself. And we know that that didn't really change, but in this moment, he worships the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But what I want you to see is that when you go back to chapter 1, verse 8, and you see something as small as what they were going to eat, their decision was, we're going to follow God. We're going to serve him. We're going to honor him. We're going to glorify him. When the decision was bow down to the statue, or else we're going to serve God. We're going to glorify him. We're going to honor him. when given a second chance to bow down to the statue and faced with literally life or death situation, they basically say it's not even a decision here. It's already been made. They had already made in their mind, and they already made in their heart that no matter what the cost, no matter what anybody was going to threaten them with or what anybody was going to do to them, they were going to honor God in everything they said and everything they did. It takes me back to Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. You guys know this. Many of you probably have a sign hanging on your house of the end of this verse. It says, "And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Now, that last part, everybody's got it hanging up in their house, right? But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's a very important part. But notice he says, choose this day whom you will serve. Now, the Bible tells us that today is the day of salvation. And we all have a choice to make at some point or another in our life, and whether or not we're going to serve God, whether or not we're going to accept Him as our Lord and Savior. And each and every one of us in this room have that choice to make in our life. Many of you, I hope, have made that choice. Some of you, I'm not naive enough to think, have not. And God gives us an opportunity to make it each and every day. But I want you to see, too, that even if you have made the choice, even if you have said that I'm going to follow God, I'm going to live for Him, and I surrender to Him, you walked down the aisle, you made a profession of faith, you got baptized, even if that's your story, you still have a choice to make each and every day. It's not just a one-time decision of, I've decided that I'm going to get saved and I'm good to go from here. Each and every day we're faced with a number of different choices, just as these guys were. They had already had faith in God. They had already decided they were going to serve God, but even in the most dire circumstances, and even in the most insignificant circumstances, if it's about the food that I eat, or if it's about life or death, I'm going to serve God. I'm going to choose Him. I've told this story several times, and it's not my own story, but a story from the BSU director at East Central. He told us one time that he was trying to teach his children this concept of, no matter how big or small the decision is, we go to God. We go in prayer, we ask Him what He wants us to do. And so he said they're in Walmart one day, and they're looking around, they can't find their son. And so as parents do, they begin to panic a little bit, and they're looking for him, they're calling his name, he won't answer, they're looking down the aisles. Finally, they find him on the toothpaste aisle. And he's standing there, and he's praying and asking God what kind of toothpaste they should use. And obviously kids do some really funny things, really cute things, but the Bible talks about a childlike faith. And there's a lot of times in life that we feel like the things that we are praying for or thinking about or considering are insignificant to God. That, it's not something big. It's not life or death. It's not moving to a new place, making a complete life change, new decision. So I'm not going to bother God with it. I can make this decision. He tells us in Isaiah 55, he says, "My ways are higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts." And simply put, I like to put things simple because I'm pretty simple. Simply put, God knows more than you. And He knows better than you. His will for your life is far better than anything you could ever imagine, anything you could ever think up or conjure in your mind. And no matter how big or small the decision, no matter how big or small the circumstances, He should be the first place that we go. We should choose to honor Him by coming to Him in prayer. We should choose to honor Him by the actions that we take. And not think that anything that we come up with is going to be insignificant to Him, because He loved us enough to send His Son to die on the cross. So He loves us enough to have an intimate relationship with us. You think about couples that are married with your spouse. How many little things you talk about and little decisions you make. And you think about how much you love your spouse. And God loves you significantly more than you can even fathom, why would he not be interested in those little things in your life? Why would he not want you to come to him with no matter the decision, no matter the choice? We're all faced with choices on a day-to-day basis. And the decision we have to make is who we're going to serve. As Joshua says, choose this day who you will serve. Are we going to serve God? Are we going to serve ourselves? We're going to serve the world? One of my favorite quotes says, if you live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their rejection. I hope that we make the choice to live for God. If today you've never made that choice, and you're sitting here and you know, God is speaking to you and telling you that today is the day of salvation. There's no reason to wait anymore. You're not promised tomorrow. Then choose this day who you will serve. If you've made that decision, you're a Christian. You're living for him. Praise God. But choose this day who you will serve. Are you going to serve God? Are you going to choose to follow him and honor him?